Hey, Tim, how are you today?
I am doing fine. I'm feeling like the world can throw anything at me and I can stay on balance. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, but now that you said that, you threw Agile at me, and you know that I'm not an Agile guy. So I'm kind of interested in learning today as much as I have to offer from just plain old project management methodology. So why don't you kick us off with what you were thinking?
So, before we start talking about Agile,
Sure.
let's set some ground rules here. I don't have an Agile certification, but because of the approach of the project management professional certification, Agile has gone through a lot of influence, and half of the exam is on Agile. So late last year, I had to go to PMI training and learn it. And so I'm a certified trainer in PMP, which means I can actually talk about it publicly. But at the same time, I've been doing Agile pretty much my entire career, and I bet you have too. Let me give you a couple examples, okay?
Well, first I was going to insert something. This is my quirky humor, but because you said that you're not Agile, an Agilist, does
Yeah.
that mean you're not safe? See what I did there? See what I did there?
Yes, yes, yes.
All right.
Well, we may have an opportunity to talk about that too, but
All right.
first,
Yes.
let's give a couple stories. I have two stories today. Back in the early 1990s, I was hired as an IT tech, and I was working on my business undergrad. And my director, he was a supervisor, had about seven of us techs that worked for him. And he came in one day with a case, I mean, a big brown box of 3-ring binders. And he said, they just dropped it off. I don't know how we're going to get this done. And so he said, let's sit around the table here. Here, this one's yours, this one's yours, this one's yours, and this one's yours. You guys plan this, and then we're going to pull the plan together. It's like he was asking us to step up and be responsible. And it was really cool because it gave us an opportunity to, number one, experience a little bit about project management, but also it gave us an opportunity to understand how planning impacts work and how work impacts planning. And so it made us a much stronger team. We had to rely on each other as much as we relied on him.
So
Now,
you became self-managing in a way, right?
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Self-organizing,
Yeah.
right? And that's what adaptive means. We hear this word agile, but we hear the word adaptive. We don't know that what adaptive means. It means self-organizing. And that's what he created, a team that can hit the ground running no matter what gets thrown at it. And the second story was actually a kickoff. I was a business analyst, and this was back in 2005, 2006, I think. And the project manager was actually a product manager, and he was launching with us a new service that we were doing. And he said, we're going to do this project agile. And he knew 2/3 of the team had no background. And he said, okay, here's a puzzle. 1,000-piece puzzle, one of those horrible ones, right? And he dumped them out, and he said, that's your backlog. And we said, okay. And he says, get to work. And so we automatically started sorting things out. And he said, hey, you're putting sides here and here and here, and you guys over here are putting colors around. Okay, let's call the sides and the corners an objective, right? We're going to have a picture, right? And the main objective is to make this picture look just like it is on the top of the box. And let's call these piles of colors features. And so you guys work on the blue feature, you guys work on the orange feature, and you guys work on the red feature. And as you put these things together, things are going to come in focus. And as they come in focus, let's see how they all pull together. I'll just sit back and I'll guide you. And he was observing this and watching it. He wasn't really giving anybody any help, but it was amazing to see how quickly getting people involved in the work early helped them, even before they knew they knew how they were going to work together. It was just almost as if these people naturally knew how to work together.
Those are great illustrations. So if we were to kind of boil this down, I have to remind people who have been listening to our podcast for some time, they probably don't need a reminder, but I have to remind people anyway, that I come from the world of Waterfall, or what I think I've heard you call predictive methodology. Actually, to tell the truth, I come from the world of gunslinging Western, from the old days when we didn't really do project management. We just kind of shot from the hip. But then getting into strict project management principle using what we call waterfall or predictive cycles, where you did your analysis, you did your design, you did your development, you did your testing, you did your implementation, all in a very linear approach, typically. So I can define waterfall or predictive very easily. Do you have a way, having now illustrated through a couple of stories, do you have a succinct definition, perhaps, of agile or adaptive methodology?
So let's agree that when you have a predictive project, it means you can predict it, which means you know the work and you can put it together in a plan, and you have a reasonable chance of figuring out what you want at the end, and you have a lot of confidence in that plan, and the plan drives success. That's predictive. In Agile, the only thing that you really have in mind is that we're uncertain and things are really complex, and this is going to be prone to change. So we always think about Agile as not a bunch of tasks and processes, but a framework within which people can work. And so when you look at project management, you're focused on the work. And when you look at Agile, you're focused on the relationships, which is really weird. And we'll talk about the implications and the reason why Agile may or may not be really good in certain circumstances.
That's interesting. I never thought of it that way, because in order to have a good, solid project team, even in my experiences in the waterfall technology or predictive technology or methodology, we definitely strived to have that relationship. But I wonder which came first. Was it the fact that we needed to work together that caused us to create the solid relationship? Because yes, we did have, I mean, even in every bid that we did from a predictive style, we had to understand kind of the full scope of what we were bidding so that we could put the project plan in place to be graded on that or evaluated on that to see if we would be the eventual winners. So from that perspective, we definitely had a picture of the overall end result.
So
now, I do notice, though, one thing. It's called predictive, not predictable, because sometimes our projects did go off the tracks. And so therefore the end result was not always predictable, even though it was predictive.
So one of the conversations that you and I need to have, and maybe we can do this in a future show, is we have this predictive where it's well defined up here, and we have Agile, and we well define that. We're in a world that maybe what we should not be looking at is two different methodologies, but an ability to use the strength of one methodology when needed and the strength of another methodology when that's needed. And I think that would be really good to explore, because you're exactly right. When you're doing initiating work, when you're doing that exploratory work on a major project, that's highly adaptive. It's highly agile. We don't know where it's going to go. We don't know what a lot of the value is, like building a data center. And I have a track record in that space, right? And it's like, we don't know whether, we know what a data center is, but we don't know what a data center is for this corporation. We know centralization and standardization of data and applications, but we don't know what it means for this corporation. And so from a big standpoint, it's predictive, but at the same standpoint, I'm willing to bet that a lot of aspects of every project can benefit from agile tools.
So if I'm a project manager listening to you and me right now, I would surmise from what you just said that, you use predicted the strengths of one in this situation, the strengths of another. It's almost like you're adapting as you go. And it's the wisdom of the project manager, or perhaps the experience coupled with that person's wisdom, that leads him to making a better decision and using the strength of one or the other at that point.
You know what? Let's take it to another level.
Sure.
I'm going to have to actually give a little more clarity to Agile. What is Agile and how can we really define it? I painted a broad picture, but let's get into the nuts and bolts of it.
Sounds good.
Okay? So what Agile is as a differentiator is, with predictive, you have a plan and you get approval on the baselines and you get approval on the work authorization and you move forward, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. That's basically predictive. With Agile, you create what we call objectives, not requirements. Let me give you an example. Let's say that a director has told a project team, I have a tool on the manufacturing floor, and every time they move it, they turn it on by accident. Okay. Now, that's a safety problem. So one of the objectives, whether it's predictive project or Agile, one of the objectives is we value our employees' safety. And we want to make sure that this tool doesn't hurt anybody. Now, that's going to be an objective, whether we're predictive or not. Now, if I've done this before, and if I've had a similar project with other tools, and I know that if I build a box around that switch, I'm just going to do that, right? And that solves the problem. It's easy. And I can predict a high probability of success. Now, here's where Agile gets strong, okay? In predictive, you're going to start thinking about gathering requirements, which means I need to know the size of the box, the color of the box, and I need to know the material it's made from, right? Those are the requirements, and I want to lock them in early so I can build a good scope and a good schedule and a good budget. In Agile, I don't want requirements. I want objectives, and I want needs and expectations. But here's the thing. If I start looking at a box and I show it to my stakeholders and they go down there, what if my stakeholders said, that was a silly idea, Tim? Why didn't you just put handles on the tool? And I miss that. If I gather requirements for this box, that's a sunk cost. I don't get anything back on that. With Agile, you say, let's get into the exploration in such a way that we can make these little pivots. Or maybe we'll run into a stakeholder that said, you guys for real? You see that desk in the back by the wall? There's a manual that talks all about that. And we may not have had even to do that project. And so Agile gives us this framework of exploration early. Now, in the middle of that framework, and then I'll stop here. In the middle of that framework that we're doing, we're creating these features like the different piles of colors of puzzle pieces, right? And we're creating these prototypes. And one prototype may be the size of the box. We make it out of paper so we can take it down and fit it over the switch. And another prototype may be the color of the box. And we have little color swatches that we take down and compare it against the rest of the tools. So we're doing all these things at the same time. And while we're interacting with these stakeholders, they may come up with better ideas than we had.
So what I'm also hearing you say, I think, is that if I had a different team, I might arrive at a totally different solution using adaptive.
Exactly.
So there's no
Exactly.
right or wrong. There's just the solution that gets derived from this team.
It's the best we can do today.
Yeah.
Okay. And in predictive, the best we can do today is what we did yesterday. With Agile, the best we can do today is listen to the interaction between the team and the stakeholders and use the decision making, use the conflict management, and use the communication and the negotiation that the team and the stakeholders have to find out what we can do best today, and stay as flexible as we can so that we can actually take advantage of these learnings as we progress.
Well, and what strikes me too is that, yes, we did kind of define the differences, not the pros and cons, but the differences between the two approaches to managing a project. But one thing that did not change, and I'm thinking back over the last 20 or so of our podcasts, one thing that did not change with either methodology is the human aspects of what we've been talking about. Whether it's team building or how we treat our stakeholders or how we handle conflict or whatever, teams are teams are teams, right? So we still need all of those processes, which makes for good project management.
That's the key.
Yeah.
In Agile, it's a requirement. And this is the problem. This is why Agile failed early on in corporations. An executive said, let's do this Agile because it's good, it's beneficial, it creates innovation. And then they were disengaged. And it was the same thing with the stakeholders. Just do your work. You guys are good at working, just do it. And that's not what Agile is. Agile is a deep, mature understanding. It's a commitment. It really is a commitment.
But what you're also saying, I think, and again, predictive to me is managing IT projects. That's the only way I think of Waterfall, managing IT projects. What I'm hearing you say, if I'm understanding this correctly, Agile is managing anything. So if you end up going into a corporation and train your entire corporation, I'm using a kind of a universal exaggeration here, but let's say you train the entire corporation in Agile techniques, that means any business problem can be dealt with using Agile processes or Agile ideas. Am I getting this right?
We've just had a lockdown and our employees cannot leave their houses. How are we going to figure this out? You're spot on.
Yeah, you don't do that with Waterfall.
No, what you do is you basically group your people based on the work they do on a regular basis, and then you listen to each one of them. Some of them use Zoom, some of them use WebEx, some of them use Teams. Find out which one's the best, and then have everybody go with that quickly. Find out which team is working well, and then use the best of breed to actually hand that over to the other teams. And all of this time, you're basically creating this continuous improvement shaped on focusing on the objective. Now, that's only one side. There's another side of Agile we can talk about later, where you can actually use this to get the functionality and to get the value of what you're doing into the hands of the people who want it sooner and faster, and will sooner and better. And we'll talk more about that later.
That's intriguing. So just as something I was reading a while ago also talked about something called hybrid. Is there a way that we can kind of merge the two methodologies on a project or in a business process? Does that make sense?
Oh, yes. Think about a product, okay? You're actually building a product for launch. Maybe it's a new way to lock down laptops, or it's a new way to manage workstations or something like that, right? And you're going to sell it as a consumer or as a business service or a business product, right? And one of the phases you're going to do is marketing. So you may want to run the marketing phase agile while you have the product development predictive.
Hmm.
Or you start off agile and then you get enough feedback in the first 6 weeks and you go, wow, we can do this. And you switch from agile to predictive. Or maybe you start off predictive like we did with the lockdown due to the pandemic. And then all of a sudden everything goes crazy. 9/11 was a really good example of transitioning from a predictive mindset to an agile mindset. We had to think on the fly to get like 6 or 7 engineers back from New York back to New Mexico.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, not to take us off course, but I got caught in that whole thing too. I was on a project in Michigan and we got caught. I was supposed to be in LA the next week and that all had to be delayed, and it dealt with medical issues and all kinds of stuff. And it was, yes, I had to become very agile in solving that problem and making that happen. But anyway, I don't want to go too far off on a tangent, but you look like you were going to say something.
Yeah, and this is the thing that I'm leading to. What if predictive gives a high probability of success when we have a known result, but agile is our natural state? And this is what I've been thinking about for a long time. It's taking, if you study the way humans think and organize, you put a bunch of kids in a room and give them toys, they're gonna gravitate towards each other, and they're gonna learn how to play with toys together, and they're gonna create their rules together. And I'm wondering if agile is just a response to understanding how to quickly hit the ground running in an unknown state for individuals and groups.
Or do you think agile may be something that we're so familiar with, we just happen to have given it a name now, and as a result, it's become a mystery?
Exactly.
Because I go back to we talk about kind of practical applications. I go back to my farm days. My father, my uncle, and my grandfather all had farms that were juxtaposed. And when it comes time to taking off the crops, which is your entire livelihood for the next year until you can take off the next set of crops, basically you are at the whim of the weather. You're at the whim of whatever's coming. So if a thunderstorm hits and my grandfather's crops are soggy, but they missed my father's field, you adapt and you move all of your machinery to the other field and you begin to deal with that. So you adapt as you go along based on what hits. The only objective you have is to get the crops off the field and into the granaries. So if you look at it that way, there may be a machine breaks down. So what do? You go to the implement dealer and rent one. There's something that's always happening that you're having to adapt to. Am I getting it now?
That's exactly right. Now, here's my question for you. Now that we have Agile, do you think we can get rid of predictive project management and predictive projects?
Well, if I've been listening to you carefully, and I have been, Agile deals much better with the unknown. Predictive appears to deal better with the known. And coming from a lot of the, my experience in terms of predictive and waterfall, part of it is because that's what it was. But the other part was I niched down into a single industry so that when I went from one jurisdiction to another, even though the processes might be a little different or whatever, the rules were substantially the same. And as long as you could predict the new jurisdiction's rules as being compared to the previous ones, you could predict your entire project almost down to the day you deliver. So I think there is always room for predictive.
Yes, yes. And another example, I built a business with 2 partners around this predictive model of upgrading cell towers. In 2012, the cell providers were moving to 4G, and they needed to actually, in order to carry 4G, they needed by the FCC a certain level of reliability and availability, which means backup power supplies had to be much more mature. And off of 6 weeks of work, I and my partners and some engineers actually figured out how to do this within 4 to 6 weeks on any cell tower. And we could hit the ground running. So we put together a template of the work and the resources and everything. And then it took like 2 hours of planning to put it together. So this is where predictive plays really well if you're going to have similar projects, and we do. Especially if you're in consulting and services, you're building this reliable, repeatable product or result that you can generate revenue on. But also, companies inside, they have a high level predictability as long as they know pretty much what's going to go on.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I'm thinking that, years ago, every time I went into a new corporation that needed an accounts receivable, you built a new accounts receivable. Now you don't even think about it. You just go and pick one off the shelf and it works, right? So it becomes that old predictive process became something that became cookie cutter across all like-minded companies that needed an accounts receivable process, right? I mean, so it becomes, from that perspective, you end up with a product, a checklist or whatever that's completely predictable and saves you a lot of time.
Right. And if it's not based on the technology, it's based on good practice. Like Gartner and like Forrester, they come out and they say this is a really good way to adopt technology across a 5-year cycle, or this is a really good way to consider how you approach the automation of certain things inside your organization and corporation. And so it's not just for implementing technology, it's for implementing anything under good practice.
So if I'm a project manager, an IT project manager listening to you and me today, understanding that Agile is becoming much more prominent in the industry, understanding that it's around not organized, what did you say? Self-managing? Oh, no, self-organizing.
Self-organizing. Yeah.
So understand. So what is the role of the project manager then if these teams can kind of...
And that's the question every project manager has going into our classes. Doesn't Agile mean the project manager go away? We have a Scrum Master. We have an Agilista. We have a project team. It's really funny because there's 2 ways that I thought about before I started teaching. And as I started explaining this and working through this with my student, it obviously came to 2 messages. Number 1, the management of projects is not just the management of work. It's my communications, it's my budget, it's my schedule, it's my risk, it's my quality, it's my scope, right? And every project, whether it's agile or predictive, has those pieces. So what you do is, under predictive, you understand what scope means and how to manage it in a predictive manner. And then under agile, you understand what scope means and how to manage it in an agile manner. So as a project manager, you map it. Now, the second thing that we need to talk about is project management and project manager. Are we talking about it as a job title? Are we talking about it as an assignment? Are we talking about it as a group of tasks or a role? And this is the thing. Companies love job titles and assignments because basically that's what they pay for.
Yeah.
That's the skill set. Now, that means that the Scrum Master may have the role of project manager, or the product owner has the role of the Scrum Master and the role of sponsor and the role of project managers. So in my classes, I don't necessarily talk about job titles or assignments. I talk about groups of tasks. And that way, the project manager may not even be one person, or it could be an organization or two organizations.
Well, I guess I can see it's almost like a matrix management kind of process. I mean, if you think about project management in the traditional waterfall or predictive, it's a very hierarchical approach to project management. This sounds more like you can have multiple bosses at any point in time during the process, but they all have to kind of understand their role and work off of each other in a collaborative method. As opposed
Good. Exactly.
Now let me throw one more thing in here. If I'm doing something that's kind of an unknown and I'm trying to solve the problem to get to the objective, that means I have to have subject matter experts from my customer organization as part of that team, who also may have, if I'm understanding this correctly, who also may have management responsibilities or roles in that team.
So this is where the relationship comes in. What we're talking about is comparing jobs, tasks, and roles with job titles and rank. And this is where collaborative comes in. And this is why it's so critical as more and more of us move into this agile space, that we have to learn how to lead not just our teams who report into us, not just our peers who we need to influence, but also we need to lead up, and we need to set expectations and manage up. And so it takes a lot more maturity from a, from a collaborative agile environment than it does in a predictive hierarchical model.
Well, let me throw something else at you that just occurred to me. In a hierarchical approach, in the predictive approach, I, as project manager, may feel I'm king of the mountain. Now I'm going into Agile, and suddenly on this project, I'm just one of the masses. Yes, I have some reporting responsibilities, but in certain areas, I am not the expert, so I have to give up my authority, my king of the mountain complex, to another person to lead at that point.
Yeah,
I can see where maturity definitely comes in, especially to those people who are aspiring to higher and higher positions.
Yeah, one of the influencers of leadership right now, Simon Sinek, says it really good. He says a leader deserves a styrofoam cup, right? When you have a title, like you're a senator or you're an executive or a CXO, you may be drinking from China, but that China cup is not for you personally. It's for that job title. The styrofoam cup is for the person. And that's what I remember whenever I walk in. I've always been this way. I'm not into hierarchy. I'm into getting the best work out of the best team, no matter what it takes.
So for project managers listening to us, they're safe as long as they are collaborative and as long as they bring their expertise to the table. They still have their position in terms of being responsible and reporting up to their superiors, but at some point they may have to yield some of their power, if I can use that word, to someone who knows better. And maybe in some cases, depending on where you are, the scrum master may be the better one to take the reins for a while the project manager becomes an assistant to the scrum master, even though the project manager may still be responsible.
Yeah, it's taking the halo off.
Yeah, good.
It's saying it's not my idea.
So Agile's
go ahead.
No, you go ahead, finish.
It's not my idea. I want the best idea.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the experts around you, you're in the wrong room.
Well, and I've been in those situations, and I learned after in the waterfall methodology or predictive, I learned after a few attempts that my customer was as important as my team. And there's quite often, even in those days, where I had customer people, I would educate them and orient them to the team so that they could stand shoulder to shoulder with us as IT people, where we got better ideas because they, from their lack of understanding of IT, came up with much better ideas than we as IT people who were practitioners in the technology, but not in the business. And so I can see that being even more pronounced in the Agile environment, where if we let our customers go with their ideas and kind of excel in terms of saying, wait a minute, in my business, if we did this, it would work better. I can see where Agile can become a much more creative approach to solving problems and achieving objectives.
Yes, as long as everybody knows the roles and responsibilities.
Yeah.
You know, how do I vote quickly? How am I able to express my opinion and not hurt other people's feelings, right? So you're asking everybody, stakeholders and team, to step up. Now, we do this as project managers. You know, we learn self-awareness and emotional intelligence, and we have responsibility and accountability. They, you know, when you go to project management school, they give that to you in buckets until you're tired of hearing about it. We have to turn around and give that to our stakeholders and our sponsor and our team. One other thing you said was this whole thing about delegation and empowering. And a lot of project managers are scared of that, because empowering means giving away some of my power.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Well, and I saw this in such practical terms just a few weeks ago, when we were oddly enough catching one of our first flights after COVID on a vacation. And we got into a situation where there was weather problems, and we had to do all of, you know what happens with weather problems, and connections get missed and all that kind of stuff. And I watched the floor as we were brought back into the terminal off of the plane to make other arrangements. I watched what happened when the supervisor turned to one of the ramp agents and said, "Go, take over." And I thought that was very mature in that situation at that exact time, for the king of the mountain to turn to the guy with knee pads and dirt under his fingernails and says, "You take this over because you know what you're doing." I thought that's probably a very practical example of Agile in motion.
Yes. And actually, delegation gives the responsibilities of the work to the people who actually do the work themselves. And that's one of the key aspects of building a healthy relationship. Another piece is that if that actually hands it over, it allows me to do more strategic and more executive parts of management. So I actually, if I can give that tactical work to the team, where they're managing the schedule and scope, and they're even looking at their resources, I can actually start doing my broad scan and look at my stakeholders and their response, and look at my sponsor and their response. And I can look at the clouds coming in with the weather and start forecasting while they're managing that. And so when I get to have a conversation with the people doing the work, we have a more rounded discussion.
Exactly. And in this situation, I was amazed to watch the ramp agent, who knew enough about operations anyway, to now give instructions to the supervisor to get on the computer and prioritize people in terms of their next flights. And that young man, in this case, ended up finding out that we could catch another flight and certain thing. He ended up sending people down to the ramp, getting our bags off, bringing them to us so that we could scurry across and catch the next flight. I don't think the supervisor could have made that happen unless the ramp agent knew exactly where everything was positioned and how everything was working. And he saved our vacation, well, at least the first day of our vacation.
Yeah, that's and that's good relationships. That's good people management.
So Agile then, from a project management point of view, is more than just a set of tools, right?
Yeah, and the question then does, how do I create that environment? How do I, quote unquote, do Agile?
Well, and before I even answer that, let me throw another challenge in here. And that is, if we truly are dependent on our customer to help solve the customer's problem, how do we bring them up to speed? And because so often I've seen in projects in the old days, so often I've seen, as we rely on our customers, they are intimidated. They feel less than these bright young IT professionals. How do we bring them in so that if I were to come in from the outside and look at the team, I would not know who was IT and who was customer, because they're all collaborating and work together. I think that's the extra piece of this self-organizing team approach.
Right. So we have all of these new terms and phrases and concepts that actually fit really well into what you're describing. It actually is really interesting. First of all, there are meetings, and they're very specific, and there's a lot of them, but it's not like meetings we have right now. We talk about effective meetings, and Agile and Scrum, we'll talk about Scrum in a while, intend to create these meetings really short, share information really quickly, so we can use that information and turn it back into the work as quickly as possible. Like before you start the work, it could be daily, could be weekly, it could be at the beginning of a group of work, and we can actually say, what do we got done? Where are we right now? Where do we think we're going tomorrow? And what does it look like from an issues and risk standpoint? And then at the end of the work, you say, what did we get done? What could have gone better? And if we were to do that work again, what would we have done in it in a different way? So this concept of collecting information around continuous improvement is constantly fed in. Now, you can do that in predictive, right? You don't have to do that just in Agile. At the same time, we're also working deeply with our stakeholders. They're engaged in the work. It's constant user acceptance testing. It's constantly prototyping. And at the end of that development of that early prototype, and let's make it quick, take it to them, and so we can get feedback and take that feedback back in.
So based on what you just described, how do you keep an old guy like me, who's done lots and lots of waterfall projects, from turning that, did you call the stand-up, for that early kind of beginning meeting? How do you keep that beginning meeting from turning into just a status report? If you guys think you said, yeah.
It's managing effective meetings. It's built in the early description of the project, and we'll talk about this later, but it's the setup. Everybody is focused in on, number one, we are going to have this type of a team. Here's how the team's going to work. We're not going to talk about tasks right now. We're going to talk about how we're going to work together. Here's what we mean by meetings. This is only what we're going to do with this meeting. This is only what we're going to do this meeting. So all of a sudden, the concept of ground rules and team charter almost become the focus of the entire project.
Well, and I think the way you also described it, it's like, what have I done? What am I going to do? What are the impediments or risks to what I'm working on? It almost gives permission for people at any level, and I'm talking now kind of your career level, at any level, to be able to breathe a sigh of relief, saying someone's listening to me. I can't get my job done because someone hasn't brought in this particular piece of software that I need. So you're heard. So it's no longer a status report in terms of, well, I'm behind 3 days. It's, I will become behind very quickly unless I get this situation resolved. So I can see why it becomes more than, if you do it right, I can see why it's more than just a status report. Then it becomes truly an effective way of collaborating and getting our work done.
Now, it does require that everybody embraces emotional intelligence and self-awareness. It does require that part of the project manager's job is teaching everybody conflict management, and negotiation. And this is one of the things that you are going to invest in more, which is, along with building a very strong and very well communicated team charter, you're also going to be looking for the health of the team, the health of the work, and the behaviors of the individuals contributing to the team. And so delegation is almost a requirement in order for a project manager to be successful in this part of the work.
And it sounds like a little bit of delegation up doesn't hurt either. Because sometimes the only person who can clear my my impediment, or my, I guess it's called blocker in some cases, may be someone who is not part of my team and maybe above my team, or maybe above me in the organization. Tim, we just lost your audio.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah, you're good. Sorry.
Yes. And in fact, it's really interesting because escalation became a good practice in the 5th edition of the PMBOK. And now escalation is a strategy. It's a risk response. Escalation is an appropriate response for all sorts of things. And it's effective communication. Again, we don't escalate based on, what we feel. We escalate on what we analyze and what's the most effective, path forward.
So again, this guy here who spent 40 years doing project management in a very hierarchical, very linear fashion in many ways. Will that process ever go away? I mean, I know we talked earlier about the fact that we still need predictive, but do you think at some point it'll just begin to vanish over time?
See, I'm following up on the Standish Group's research, and they've been forecasting, some type of direction of this. There are different types of Agile, and in future shows we'll get into this, but there is a flow-based Agile, and it gets really weird. Some futurists say that even project management itself could be integrated into the way we do work, where leadership is not just predictive or agile. Leadership is not just operations or project management. Leadership is leadership. And they're starting to use a word called flow, where you have a set of tools based on the work in front of you, where everybody has the same capabilities. And everybody understands, oh, this is based on stuff that we know what to do. Let's just put a plan together. This is based on how stuff we don't know, or it's really complex. Let's work as a team. And actually it integrates in. I don't know. I think that human beings, being human beings, keep things in categories. And I think we expect to see predictive and agile projects for quite a few decades.
Well, and I think what's happening too, if I'm working inside an organization now again, this is different than myself, or my experience, where you bid on a project, you go in, you make it happen, and then you leave, right? So this is different. But within an organization, you're always striving to improve the organization, the continuous improvement of every process. So I can see where they won't even call it project management or agile or predictive or anything. At some point, I can just see, hey, I need you 10 people, go solve this problem, go. I can just see that happening as part of the daily routine and not actually giving it a name.
Now, let me give us a dose of cold water reality here too. You and I have talked about, when we've done the research in the Gallup reports, and how according to Gallup, what percentage of workers today feel really engaged?
Oh yeah, I remember. It was like, was it down in the 30s or something, or 30%?
Oh, it was even worse than that. It's under 20.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and again, we're talking mid-COVID here, right?
Yeah.
And it's been 20 to 25. It's really sad. And the thing is, you cannot do Agile in this manner.
Yeah, because Agile implies, not requires, doesn't imply, requires full engagement and focus.
That's correct. That's
Yeah.
exactly correct. And it takes not just engagement focus, but maturity. And you have to constantly be growing and adapting. So it's not something that you can just do. And it all starts with the people. Let me give you another perspective. PMI, with their new training, they rolled out and they said 80% of PMP preparation and formal project management training has to be done in this way, which means the first third of your training is all about the team, it's all about leadership, and it's all about supporting your stakeholders. And the people who go through the classes are going, Tim, I got this in business school, or can we get to schedules and cost and scope? And I'm saying, no, you got to get this stuff straight, because if you don't get this straight, no part of the other management of projects is going to get right.
Well, and it's like we talked about months ago on this podcast, is people used to think, or some people still think, that as long as I have my schedule on the wall and then I can check the progress on that schedule on my Gantt chart, and I'm looking at my progress, then I must be succeeding.
Yeah.
And what they don't realize is that what you just talked about with team and scope and stakeholders and all of that, that's when you're succeeding, not just because you're ticking a box on the wall. It's that relationship, it's that satisfying need, it's that objective satisfaction that makes sense.
Exactly right. That's exactly right, what you're talking about. And again, this is why project management and corporations trying to adopt Agile, even up into the mid 2000s or the aughts, failed miserably, because they forgot about the recognition and the engagement, and they forgot about, responsibility and accountability of the sponsor, the executives, and everybody around them. They got it from a project management standpoint, but they didn't get it from, oh, the team has to be mature here too. Do we have to invest in training of the team? You betcha.
Well, and at the risk of getting a bunch of emails after people listen to this, when I grew up in the industry, a lot of people who strive to become project managers tended to be the good, solid technicians. They weren't necessarily good at managing, but they tended to be the people who were good at their job as developers and as analysts, and worked their way up the corporation. They tended to also be fairly introverted as a class. And this is where I'm going to get emails. but truly, I think if you come at it from that perspective, then what's important is the schedule. It is the checklist. It's not so much the relationship. In fact, let me close my door and draw Gantt charts, because that's what's going to make me feel good. I think part of what we're seeing, or what we're talking about now, came from that particular mindset. People who went into computer science tend to be introverted and very much mechanical in their approach to work.
And the problem is, it takes a level of maturity to take the responsibility off yourself and move it over to others. That takes trust.
Yeah.
And that we even see this inside corporations, right? When you manage workers, it's usually because you knew that work really well.
Yeah.
And so they put you in charge. And then when things go wrong, you say, just get out of the way, right? And I'll do the work right.
Right.
And we'll get a success. Well, that's not the way it is. And with Agile, you really can't do that. You have to build a strong relationship. And this is what I mean by strong relationship, where you have people who feel safe enough to say, Tim, I think we're getting into risky waters here. Can you help me out?
Mm-hmm.
And you don't get people like that when you're in the room with a Gantt chart, instead of out on the shop floor, building those relationships.
Or having your 15-minute stand-up every morning to say what's happening so that you're always current. And that does not keep you from managing by walking around during the day. But that morning stand-up is so critical to be able to do that collaboration and do that turn on the heel to adjust what I'm doing so that I can help my neighbor, so that together we can come to the proper conclusion and objective.
Yep. Exactly.
Wow, I think I've learned more today.
You didn't learn it though, Merv. You've been doing it. And this is what I've said all along. You have naturally done it because you found out that it's easier to get work done through relationships than telling people what to do and holding them accountable for doing things wrong, instead of supporting them and make it easy for them to do things right.
Well, plus it's a lot more fun to be oriented with people than with charts. And by the way, for those students who come into your class saying, let's get the schedules and charts, you need to remind them this. Of course, I don't have to tell you how to teach, but you need to remind them that all of that is becoming tool-based, and it's like you basically look at a piece of software and it draws your schedule for you. So you don't have to be that brilliant to do a good schedule.
See, that's the key. That's the key. All of these skills are eventually going to go away. The last thing to go away is the people part. If we want to have a career where we're not replaced by machines, we work on the leadership aspects and we work on the relationship aspects.
Absolutely. And that's what makes, to me, you talked about maturity, you talked about wisdom, you talked about experience. It's that people side. By the way, it's not the last thing that goes away. Let me correct you there, Tim. It's not the last thing. It's the thing that will never go away. As long as we are humans, we need to, and that's the beautiful part of projects. That I think that's where I get invigorated on a project, is that we come together as a team and we become family. And yes, there's conflict, and yes, there's joy, and yes, there's all of these things that families go through, but we go through it together, and that becomes so invigorating on any project that I've ever worked on.
Very good. Very good. I agree with you. Do we have time to talk about Scrum, or do we want to hold that for another conversation?
Well, I was thinking about that about 7 minutes ago, that we don't have time. So we're down to our last couple of minutes. So I think we would not give Scrum a good service if we started that conversation now.
Well, we need to talk about Scrum, and we need to talk about scaled Agile too. And maybe we can actually handle those two topics in another show too. And there are other things about about Agile. We can get into the team building aspect. We can get into stakeholder engagement in an adaptive model and how that actually works. A lot of people who've heard about Agile but don't think they're doing Agile, I think if we have these conversations, they'll actually, number one, start figuring out and start connecting what they're doing right now in comparison to what Agile's talking about. But number two, find some new tricks that will help them both in their Agile and their predictive work.
Yeah, and I'd also be interested in that next conversation, is to figure out where some of these terms came from. I mean, there's scrums, there's sprints. Retrospective, I understand. That's called lessons learned in my vocabulary.
Right.
But all of these other things, I'd be intrigued as to, was this like an Australian rules football player who turned project manager and decided to become Agile?
Well, let's have those conversations. Yeah. And if anybody's listening to us right now, and you have questions, or you have input or comments, or want us to have conversations sooner about some of these topics, please do. And we're more than happy to put this stuff together for you.
Well, I always go back to our listeners. If I was a project manager listening to Tim and Merv today, I might not have gotten an A, B, C, D, E of how to go about doing this, but I certainly got shall we say, my thirst quenching bath from a fire hydrant in terms of what all of this means to me as a project manager, and how I can adapt my style to the new working process that Agile demands.
Exactly. Exactly. So where can we find you for further questions?
The best place would be on my website, which is called peoplefirstprojectmanagement.com, or on LinkedIn under Merv Jersak, or under that name as well, People First Project Management. So how about yourself, Tim?
Oh, I'm over at LinkedIn currently, and expect to see me on other social media platforms in the coming weeks.
Great. So until next time, this was fun. This was a lot of fun.
Wasn't it?
Yeah.
Thanks again for this conversation, and thank you guys for tuning in. And like I said, leave your comments, leave your questions, and we'll respond to them.
That's great. Until next time, same channel, a week from today.
Thanks
See you.
again.